arm. So that's conventional underhook. A reverse underhook is where my left beats his left, and we sit through towards the legs. You have a choice between sitting up on your elbow or sitting up on your hand. Okay, they're both good options. From these positions, you create a lot of extension in your opponent's body. You take his elbow out of position. I don't want my elbow down here where he can start forming lock hands, crazy counters to you like so. Okay, so we always want his elbow taken out of position. This means that if Placido ever turns towards me, he's exposing his back. The more he turns, the more back exposure there is, until it gets to a point where his knees face down towards the floor. You'll get into situations now where you have total back exposure, which you can use in various ways. Okay, you can be quite smart about this. As your opponent turns towards you, you can put a foot between his legs, and that now becomes a hook. So at any time from here with heist, you now have the perfect entry into hooks. Okay, so reverse underhook can be a very useful method. If you feel your opponent is turning into you, it will generate automatic back exposure. So those are the 5 major arm configurations. They're good points and they're bad points. When you're pitting your opponent from side control, you have a great deal of choice with regards to various configurations of your arms and your legs. Unlike the mounted position where there's very limited choice, you have great mobility and movement through a variety of different positions. Let's look now at the idea of different leg configurations that we can use when we're across side. Okay, the one you'll use more than all the others put together is a squared hip, where my 2 knees are flat on the floor and we're square like so. Okay, so my hips square to the mat. This is the most stable variation, okay, because my hips are square down to the mat. If Placido bridges left and right, I'm very difficult to move, okay. The minute you start sitting down to a hip, there will be a weakness in base on whatever side your hip is down. So if Placido sits up into me in this position, I have no base behind me. Okay, my base is very strong going forward because I have a post in that direction, but I have no post behind me. Okay, if I sit through in this direction, again, my base is very strong going forward, but I have limited to no post behind me. So when Placido bridges into me, my base gets challenged in that direction. When I have a square knee position, my base, because my pelvis faces straight down towards the floor, is equally strong in all directions, and I have posts in all directions. Okay, essentially I have 4 posts here, my elbows and my knees. So when Placido goes to move me around, I feel very, very stable. Okay, however, this stability comes at a considerable price. When I take a squared posture, you will see that there is a hole in front of my hip. And at any given moment, my opponent can bring his knee into that hole. Okay? So that's the great weakness of squared posture. Do you see that giant hole in front of my right hip? If my opponent positions his knee right there and then starts working his knee inwards, he escapes quite easily. Okay? Once his knee penetrates to the inside, he has a strong purchase on my hip, and any pushing pressure on his part will enable him to elbow escape out. So that's the great weakness of squared posture. It's exceptionally stable, but it creates a giant hole for an opponent's knee to penetrate, and as a result, they can elbow escape out of the position. So what we need to do is to defeat his elbow escape with movement. Okay, let's turn the angle a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So, from here, as Placido's knee starts to work its way in, I can feel that my squared posture is becoming a liability. So from here, I'm going to take my knees off the floor, and as his knee comes in, I'm going to turn my hips in the same direction as his knee. Now, I've closed the gap. There, you can see the hole in front of my knee. As his knee starts to come in, I turn my hips and the hold disappears. As he tries to bring the knee in now, it just runs into my buttocks. From this position, I'm still pretty stable. If I sit down to a hip, it's a good strong pin position. As he fights the elbow escape, it's very, very difficult. The problem is I'm less stable backwards. So it came at a price. So from here, when I see Placido switch to a different kind of escape and take me backwards, I just return to the stable square position. So every time I see Placido bring the knee in, he's taking advantage of the weakness of the squared stance. So as the knee comes in, I sit out. Then as he takes advantage of the weakness of the sit out, I return to square. Do you see what's going on here, guys? I'm identifying the strengths and weaknesses of each leg configuration, and I'm using them accordingly. The weakness of the square configuration is your opponent's elbow escape. He can penetrate in front of your hip with his knee, but that's easily cured with a sit-out. The weakness of the sit-out is backward stability, but that's easily cured by returning back to your square stance. By using the intrinsic stability of the square stance and the ability to hide hip exposure with the sit-out stance, you can easily play your opponent and move from one position to another to avoid his escapes. You can go further with this. When your opponent has an underhook in here, there's a danger now that he can use that to move you and go into his elbow escapes. Like so. So, when I see this, I'm going to bring my arm over, and as my opponent goes into his elbow escape, I'm going to sit out in the opposite direction. Here, you can see there's a giant hole in front of my right hip, which my opponent's knee can enter. From here, when I sit out, my knee closes the hole. And as a result, I can sit out like so. From here, my hand blocks my opponent's hip. Yes, I'm more vulnerable to being taken backwards. But if I block the hip and then come back up to my knees, now I've got that stable square stance. So when he goes to take me backwards, I'm not going anywhere. Let's have a look at that again. So, from a situation where there is some danger of my opponent elbow escaping, and I feel the knee coming in, I switch and sit out. As a result, my knee blocks the elbow escape. This comes at the price of backward stability. So I must be prepared to replace my knee with my elbow. This makes it possible for me, as he goes to bridge, to come back up into a good stable position and hold my opponent down with a square stance. You can see what's happening here. We're switching our hips and playing between square stance and forward sit out and backward sit out to shut down my opponent's bridge and elbow escape. Let's go further with this. Sometimes I'll feel my opponent has very strong escapes when I'm perpendicular to him. So he's got strong escapes in the perpendicular position. So from here, I'm simply going to reposition my body. I'm going to move around and go to a position north-south. Now, when he tries to elbow escape, I'm just not there. There is no elbow escape because I'm above his shoulder line. If he tries to bridge and toss me off from a bridge, it's almost impossible from the north-south position. And I can use my head and shoulders to prop him down. The main danger now is that my opponent will form frames inside and then hit high leg escapes and bring legs up like so. So when I see this danger starting to start up, I sit out. Now with the sit out, when he tries to bring the legs up, I'm just in the wrong position to do so. His best bet now is to start going back to bridging escapes because the sit out is inherently unstable in certain directions. When I see that, I just return back up to my knees. And as a result, there's no more danger from that bridge. As Placido goes to extract his arm and return into position, you've made a complete circumnavigation from your opponent's right side to the left side. If Placido goes for the elbow escape on his left side now, we know what to do. Sit out. Now when he goes to bridge, we return. If I see he's starting to develop a strong escape the hip line, I'll go back up above the shoulder line. I'll transfer across to the other side of the body. If I see him trying to elbow escape, I might well sit out. If I see him trying to bridge, I might well come back up to my knees. If I see him trying to slide out, I must wedge the other side of his hips. If he tries to bring the knee in, we go back into that sit out. If I see him trying to bridge, we return back up to a square stance. And in this way, you completely shut down your opponent's various escapes by moving between sit-outs, squared position, transferring around your opponent's body, and changing the angle by going to north-south. In this way, you're using mobility and various postural changes in your legs to completely shut out the main forms of escape.